So what will we cover today? Three main topics that we're going to cover. One, what are the benefits of revenue attribution? And we're going to talk about a few different types of attribution at the front end, just to kind of level set. Finally, and next, multi-touch. What is multi-touch revenue attribution, particularly in HubSpot? Certainly, there's all types of attribution models out here in the marketplace. Today, we're going to focus a little bit high level on general attribution, and then we'll talk about what that means to HubSpot. And hopefully, whether you're a HubSpot customer or not, you'll find some benefit in that. And then we're going to look at actual attribution models, because even if you're in the HubSpot ecosystem, you have options in terms of what model you actually plan to use. So some of the questions that I get, we go out and we engage with customers and we begin to speak about attribution. Typically the customer is a bit more sophisticated just in terms of their purview of marketing and thinking about return on investment of their total marketing spend. And the types of questions we typically get is, first and foremost, like, what is it? Not everybody, uses the thought of attribution in their day-to-day job. Two, why do I need it? That's a little bit of a typo there, but why do I need it? Is it accurate? How do I manage it? And then finally, what model is best for my organization? Typically, if they understand the first three questions, we oftentimes get to what model, because there's so many different models to choose from, even within the HubSpot ecosystem, that's a point of question. And we're going to cover that today as well. So to get started, what is multi-touch revenue attribution? Ultimately, it's a report, right? And it's a report that allows a marketer or seller or selling team to really understand the real impact that, marketing collateral or emails or any of the outbound, digital things that you're using, what impact it had on the purchase or the sale. Today's conversation will principally be around revenue attribution, but we are going to talk about a few other points that you should at least note down that maybe you can go back and check out later. When you think about multi-touch attribution, what we're really trying to do is understand what is the ultimate value of each one of those touch points that you have engaged over the life cycle of your marketing. So think about email marketing, think about landing page conversions, think about return on ad spend, or ROAS as it's oftentimes called within the space. Think about the phone call that your salesperson made or your BDR team made. All of these things are touches along the customer journey, ultimately to a transaction. And wouldn't it be beautiful at the end of the day if we could go back and say, wow, that category of email or that campaign, or maybe specifically that email, had the most impact on this aggregate group of sales or aggregate group of customers. Those are the things that marketers thirst for. And honestly, those are the things that the other leaders within your respective organizations thirst for. And, I love to say that in today's world of marketing, it's pretty fun to go sit down with someone of the financial side of the business, like the CFO or anyone in the C-suite or the CEO, and have a real metrics-based financial conversation about your marketing and what that means to the bottom line. Just several years ago, our ability to do that was, one, very expensive, and two, may not even have been impossible, just depending on how you've put together your technology stack. So at the core of it, we have models, and we're going to dive in pretty deep into these models a little bit later. But in these models, we're trying to understand what is the actual amount of revenue that you can attribute to a certain touch point. And that's ultimately what we want to do, is to know that, wow, that email drove this much revenue, or that landing page drove this much revenue, or that downloadable asset, or that webinar like this, or anything like that. We want to understand what is the actual point of attribution to that piece from a revenue standpoint. That's ultimately what we want to understand. Now, as much as we want to talk about revenue, I'd be remiss if we don't at least mention the other types of attribution that exist. So one of the first that for, I'd say, a longer period of time that we were able to do is contact create. So basically, how do I go and attribute what converted someone from a prospect, or sometimes people use the name suspect, meaning an anonymous visitor on our website, let's say, and converted over to a contact. That is what we would call contact create. And it's really good to know what is it that you could attribute that contact creation to? Now, we all know that oftentimes is the very front end or top of the funnel. Brian was here, he'd probably hit me for talking about funnels, but top of the funnel, sort of a lead that created the contact. And we want to know that. We want to know what are the things that we're doing from a marketing standpoint that created the contact. But then, of course, we have those in the organization that are really interested in the numbers, and they not only want to know about the contacts that got created, but they want to know about the actual revenue. So that leads us to the primary point of today's conversation. For any of you all that are actually HubSpot users, you will find that both of these are available within the enterprise versions of HubSpot Marketing. The next one, again, we're going to focus more on is revenue. And I've got in yellow there, potential and actual revenue. So one of the latest things that are hot off the press, I don't know, feels like a couple of weeks ago, it's still technically in beta, but it is available, generally available, is deal-based attribution. So not only do we want to understand attribution once the deal has closed, meaning we actually have a customer, we also are very interested in understanding what actually attributed to getting the deal created. You know, what was the actual touch point that said, hey, we now have a deal in the pipeline. So almost think about it as stages. If you were to go from contact create to what I would call potential revenue or deal attribution, and then you actually have actual revenue. So you basically have 3 stages of attribution at your ready within the HubSpot ecosystem. And all 3 of them are very, very important. So again, today focused mostly on revenue, but I wanted to make sure you understood the full scope of what is available within the HubSpot ecosystem as it pertains to attribution. Okay, so what we want to understand about revenue attribution are things like content, channels, and nurturing. So what types of content are our customers engaging with? Now, of course, we can go and look at things like website performance. We can look at blog performance. We can look at downloadable content. Of course, all these things in an incremental way are available to us within HubSpot today. But we want to be able to boil them up to the top and see them in aggregate, and again, tie that revenue to it. So understanding the content types, and then also what channels, like what exactly is the channel? Is it an advertising channel? Is it an email channel? Is it a call channel? Is it just a general web, organic search? What are the channels that are actually driving this particular revenue so that we can do more of that? And ultimately, that's what we want to drive is, hey, what do we need to do more of? Perhaps what do we need to do less of? Or what do we need to change of the things that we feel like maybe they should be having more impact because we're putting a lot of financial resources into it, but for whatever reason, it's not converting or it's not driving revenue. So lots of decision sciences perhaps on what you do, but understanding it is really, really important on the front end of that. So what are some of the benefits? One is to assess what's working and what's not, as I mentioned. The other piece is to understand how to allocate resources for the future so you can truly maximize your return on investment. Those are really, really important. I think also being able to understand so that you can make better decisions and build a case for budget. Every year, depending on the fiscal of our client base, we have conversations about budgeting. And the question is always, what should we budget for the upcoming year? Or, sure, we're doing a good job in aggregate, but what specifically are we finding that we believe is a little more effective or a little less effective such that we need to change? So using data like this is very, very helpful in having the budget conversation, with your team or your leadership. And the other piece is around sales and marketing alignment. I oftentimes joke about in graduate school, early in my career, we talked about sales and marketing like it was just this harmonious group of folks. And once I got into the real world, as they say, I have found that oftentimes they have been siloed groups. And being siloed groups is certainly not as effective as it needs to be. And this is one of the few cases that I think data and systems might actually help with that alignment because there is something in it for both organizations. You really can come here and see, what sales activities and what marketing activities are actually driving the most deals. Marketo recently released a survey and basically came up and said that sales and marketing alignment can help your company become 67% better at closing deals. And that pretty much comes back down to transparency. Who's on deck doesn't matter as much anymore. The question is how is sales helping marketing become better because of the feedback they're getting? How does marketing help sales become better? Letting them know the types of engagements and things that their customers are going on along the journey. So a couple key takeaways from that introductory part of the slide. One, multi-touch revenue attribution, it helps sales and marketing teams think about, understanding the impact on sales. That's really the key driver. Understanding your attribution from the perspective of budgeting so that you can help with those conversations around goal setting on an annual or quarterly basis, however you plan. Those things are very important. And then ultimately, having sales and marketing teams come together. It's a beautiful thing when you do it. We have several customers that do this, and I can tell you, we really see the difference when you truly have that alignment. It's quite amazing to see when those teams sit down to the table, have the same data set that they're talking about, and do the planning together. So we really, really do encourage that. Okay, so now we'll jump into multi-touch revenue attribution specifically to HubSpot. So get this out of the way. It is not available to every HubSpot level. You must have HubSpot Marketing Enterprise to have access to this. And you also must be using the deals board. You don't necessarily have to subscribe to sales, but you have to be tracking deals. As you can imagine, that's how revenue is allocated in HubSpot, is through deals. For those Salesforce folks in the room, that would be analogous to opportunities in the Salesforce world. But deals is where revenue aligns. So if you do happen to have a HubSpot and a Salesforce integration, just be aware that you can flow those opportunities from Salesforce right into HubSpot, and they will flow into the deal boards. There's another little caveat, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. But that is, kind of big rocks, little rocks. That's a big rock. If we don't use deals or have some type of integration from our, if it's a third-party CRM, such as Salesforce flowing in, then we really can't do attribution here. We could do contact attribution, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of contact conversion, but we can't do revenue-based attribution that way. The things that we need to understand about the deal, though, is we need to understand when the deal was created. We need to understand close one for revenue attribution. For deal create attribution, we just need to know when it was created. And associated contacts. So that is the other sort of big rock, is to make sure that you actually associate contacts to the deal, because otherwise we just have revenue, but we have no idea who are the individuals within said organization that helped create or impact that deal, and what did marketing do along that life cycle to get that done. So that's very important, along with close date, and then ultimately the amount, because with revenue, we actually want to talk about sales. So you've got to make sure that the amount is in there. In terms of a hug tip, right? So this is the HubSpot user group. So a hug tip is that if your deal is not associated to the contact, just know that, it won't be included in the attribution model output. So thinking about, from a change management standpoint, or just kind of like organizational sales and marketing management, making sure you've got some kind of process in place that effectively associates the right contacts with a deal. Sometimes we see environments where if you're selling into the enterprise market, and you may have, particularly for those that may pull lots of data in at a time from various sources, they have lots of contacts that are associated with a particular account. And you don't want to just associate all those contacts. You want to associate the ones that you are engaging with to make sure that you can accurately attribute the revenue accordingly. Because it certainly is possible for larger organizations for you to have multiple deals in the same organization. So you just be careful about who you associate, but make sure you do actually have an association. That's very, very important. Okay, so what are interactions? So interactions represent these touch points along the way, right? And these are the things that we want to track. So within the HubSpot ecosystem, we think about things like, what was the first interaction? So, someone came to your website anonymously, or maybe a salesperson sent them a sequence, an email out of Sales Hub, and then drove them back to do a form fill or register for a webinar that came from LinkedIn. Who knows? Contact created, those are interactions. So we know that when a contact was created, and of course, deal created and deal won. Those are key interactions. So when we get into looking at the different types of models, and one is first interaction, basically we want to understand, hey, first interaction represents the first time that a lead was interacted with your brand through one of those channels. So it's just simply that, first interaction. Contact created is later. For those that are experienced HubSpotters, you know that in today's world, I could come to your website, if you've got it all cookied correctly, and I can navigate your website for days, weeks, maybe even months. And assuming that I haven't abolished all of my cookies and you can still recognize me as an anonymous user, the day that I actually go and do a form fill, interact with your chat bot, sign up for a meeting with your sales team, any of those things would create a conversion event. And at that point in time, you would see what you see here on the screen as a contact created. But it wasn't the first interaction, because I actually did have interactions with you prior to. I was just anonymous. So I didn't raise my hand and say, this is Alex Moore. I just came to check things out. Those previous interactions, of course, are still important, but they don't represent contact created. The other big rock, as we mentioned, is deal created. So when someone goes from a contact, usually to some type of qualification, some organizations would use marketing qualified, others sales qualified, but some type of qualification where you actually go and create a deal, that would be the third one. And then finally, the deal being won. So those are the 4 big rock interactions that we are oftentimes looking at. As I mentioned, it's important to know that HubSpot is also tracking these middle points that I mentioned. So those big things are happening, but there's all types of other interactions that happen. And that tracking is happening so that we can give credit to those things, unless you decide not to. And we're going to maybe show a screenshot actually here next, and we'll go into the system later so you can see this. But ultimately, you have the ability to customize what interactions actually go into the attribution reports. So the screen that you see here is one of the configuration screens. So one of the very first steps before going down the attribution path is to go in and say, hey, these are the things that I want to actually include in my attribution model. By default, they're all going to be turned on, but you can go in and open these accordion menu items, and you can see all the subs within the various categories, and you can toggle them on and off so that you can make a decision as to what you want to track in your organization to make sure that the attribution model really fits you. And you can do that for revenue attribution, and maybe a little tough to read here, but you also have deal create attribution. So both of those are there, and you can customize that to make sure that your model fits your organization the best. Attribution modeling, it can get a little overwhelming. And if you're like, hey, I'm really just not a math person, all this calculation and these things are all, really tough. Just know that the benefit of using a tool like HubSpot, and HubSpot specifically, is that it does a lot of the heavy lifting for you. You don't have to have a master's degree in stats or be a statistician to be successful in coming in and actually using the attribution tool. All right, so just to kind of sum up this notion of a journey and the things that we're tracking, here is a customer journey where you can see the big rocks, the first interaction, the contact create, the deal create, and the deal won. But then you also see these micro interactions of page views and CTA clicks, and you see sales rep reply emails, meetings, so on and so forth. These are all things that are along the journey, and these are all very important. And as you know, going in and looking at these on an individual basis gets really, really hard. So we want to be able to do this at a high level so we can actually make decisions on it. All right, so now we're turning the corner to third base. We're going to get into the actual models. And this is probably one of the most challenging for people to grasp. So pay attention here. This is really important stuff. And ultimately, like, what is that, right? An attribution model is a rule or set of rules that basically determines how you get credit, right, for revenue. And that's what we're going to run through today. One, I'll tell you, look, there is no right or wrong attribution model. The number one piece of advice that we always give our clients is pick the one that's best for you. It's okay to try one, and it's okay to iterate over time. So you may start with a model and determine that you need to tweak it. I think the key thing is once you settle in, consistency, because if you're measuring how you're doing for quarter on quarter, month on month, year on year, it's important to make sure you're comparing apples to apples, because comparing different models to tweak the results is obviously not good. So getting consistency is the real key to success there. All right, so first touch. That is one of the first models. And the first touch model is pretty simple in terms of what it says. It basically says, hey, this model, I'm going to attribute 100% of the revenue to that particular touch. All right, so first touch gets it. So in this case, if that email goes out or let's not use that. Let's say if someone comes in for organic search and they come into a landing page, that organic search is going to get that particular revenue. So here's a graphic that illustrates that. So if this was $1,000 revenue deal, and they came in and they viewed this page. That page is the first interaction that we have on record for that particular contact, and they converted to a deal. Yes, they did all types of other things along the way, but those didn't matter in a first touch model. The first touch is going to get 100% of that credit. I tend to think this type of model works well if you have a very, very short sales cycle that's highly transactional. Facebook ad, $10, $50, $100 item perhaps, and it is like immediate gratification, time sensitive, first touch gets it, then that type of thing may be an acceptable model for you. If you tend to be B2B with a longer life cycle, this is probably not the one, but certainly it does fit certain businesses. On the flip side of first touch, you have last touch. And if I could see all your faces, I know you would be guessing like, aha, Alex, I get it. This is the last touch. You'd be right. All right. So in this scenario, it's the last touch. So in this one, you may have a situation where I like to think about this one in terms of like branding. If you're in a market where you have just tons of media, right? You're blasting with tons of media, mass media, not so trackable from an attribution standpoint. And that when someone comes in, they like kind of convert there, but you just don't have, maybe a lot of stickiness to the other interactions that are here. You might lean that way for a last touch type of scenario. Or if you just put that much weight on that meeting, you just know historically that the meeting is what actually does it for you, you might consider a last touch. The next one is linear. And this one is the one that in general, we would advise you to start with if you don't have any other insights into what would be best for you. And a linear model basically just gives equal distribution. It's fair for all. So it basically is saying, hey, look, we know that there's been all types of interactions throughout the life cycle of leading this lead up to a deal. That's great. So we're just going to equally give it to everyone. No one wins, no one loses. We were all in it together and part of the team. Again, if you don't have some setup already, this is a great place to start. So you can start here and then begin to tweak after that once you begin to understand more about your organization and how things are flowing. So next hug tip. That's a tongue twister, hug tip. If you're new to attribution reports, write that one down. Linear, right? Linear is the way to go. It's kind of a way to conceptualize this piece because a lot of times attribution is a little foggy for people who don't, study it or haven't been doing it. I think most people can get in and generally agree, okay, we were all a part of the deal. So this makes a lot of sense and we can at least see essentially that customer journey. And that's really what you're getting out when you think about this. And look at it this way, we're basically showing you all the different things along the journey that customer touched to get to the point of a deal. All right, so a couple more. U-shaped, and this one is just as you may imagine. It is shaped like a U, where you assign 80% of the credit to the interactions to where your contact first interacted, and then when it became a lead to your CRM, the remaining credit goes to all the other interactions. So visually, this is what this looks like. So here you can see the two pieces there sort of create the U, the pieces in the middle there. So you can see 40 and 40 went to, in this case, form submission and page view, and then 2 went to the two interactions in between. All right, so this is what you would call a U-shaped model. Again, just for context, you have the ability when you set up your attribution to determine what gets credit for what. So you can say, you know what, form submissions made or calls don't matter, or sales email replies don't matter, or CTA clicks don't matter. So again, you can refine this to make sure that you can make it your own. So that represents a U-shaped model. I tend to like this model for longer life cycles where you've got some initial contact creation where it's really hard to get that initial engagement. Make sure you get your personas and ICPs right. And then ultimately, like we've got fire trucks. All right, perfect. And then ultimately you get to the point of closing the deal, you know that you want to provide equal credit, and that's in this case to the form submission, but it could have equally been a sales rep interaction. So that is where a U-shaped model can make sense. And then a couple more, W-shaped model. W-shaped model distributes 90% of the revenue to the first interaction, basically contact creation and then deal created interactions. The remaining credit goes peanut butter spread across all the others. So again, you can see this here. So there's your 30% spread across those first interaction, contact created, and deal creation. So those are sort of those big rock interactions. And then from there, you have all the other little things in between that you're giving some credit to, all right? So you've got 30, 30, 30, and then you've got everything else is peanut butter spread. The other remaining 10% is spread there. This is what we call a W-shaped model. So as you can imagine now, I've shown you several. We've got one more to go. There's lots of different ways to think about how you actually do attribution. And this is where you've got to play with them. Go in, if you've got historical data, take a peek at your data, see how it's coming together, and then make a determination as to what's best for you. With this one, the W-shaped model focuses on marketing efforts. Although we do include deal creation, the marketing efforts are getting a little bit heavier weight simply because deal is only getting one of those 30%, and the marketing efforts are getting the other 60. All right, and then spread across, you got the remaining 10. So deals get a little bit, and everything else really is getting attributed to marketing. So if you are trying to really show the marketing effort, the W-shaped model may actually be for you. Next one is full path, and full path basically distributes 90% of the revenue credit along the four major interactions, and then splits the rest in the middle. So visually here, those four that we talked about earlier on the very front end, page views, form submissions, calls, meetings, it's giving major credit there, 22.5%, and then the remaining piece gets split among the other interactions. So here we're sort of looking at this full path, and we have appreciation for these micro interactions, but we're giving a lot of weight to the big four. All right, and then I'm gonna move for time to the last one, and this is time decay. And the time decay gets into a little bit of math, and I don't know if I included the math slide here, but essentially it gives more credit to interactions that happen closer to the time of conversion. So if you've got a really long life cycle, some big large B2B organizations may have annual 1 year, 2 year life cycles. You tend to think like recency has a lot of impact. So if you came into my database 3 years ago, but all of a sudden you did a lot of interactions in the last 3 months, I'm giving a lot more weight to that. And essentially, this is what this looks like. You can see the math. I do have a math slide, but I'll probably push through it for sake of time. But essentially here, we're looking at the half-life of these interactions to weight it. So you can see the distribution curve there, weighting more to the my right. I guess it's your right too. All right. We'll share these slides afterwards so you can see this is what the math looks like for all those math heads out there. You guys would appreciate that. So key takeaways. Multi-touch revenue attribution reports. To make them work, you got to have Marketing Hub Enterprise. So very important. And if you don't, call your HubSpot rep. I'm sure they will be happy to sell you Marketing Hub Enterprise. And your sales teams have to add deals. Interactions or touch points, just keeping that in mind. Those are touch points along the way. So you've got to be able to track those touch points to really begin to visualize that buyer's journey. That's very important. And then if you can do those two things, you really are set up for success in terms of successfully having attribution modeling at your disposal. And then finally, know that attribution models, they basically are distributing credit to touch points, right? That's what we're doing. HubSpot is doing all the heavy lifting for you. So if you're in the ecosystem using HubSpot for all the various marketing and selling outreaching that you're doing, you really have everything you need to create that model. So I'm sure there are other technologies out here that do similar things. Google Analytics, for example, they have some attribution elements built into their tool sets. And I'm sure there are other commercials tool sets that we don't work with that do it as well. So I hope you can take away from this talk that, it's about the concept of the models, and it is at some point going to require some technology investment to make it easy for you. Otherwise, you're going to have to go hire a pretty high priced statistician with a lot of other disparate tools to try to, bring that forward and create that. And again, finally, filters. You can go in and filter what you need so that you can focus on the things that are really important to your own attribution and not worried about, something that's very vanilla to everyone else out there. All right. That is the end of the slideshow, and I think I stopped right on time at 9:30. I'm going to stop here, Emily, and if you want to come back on, we can begin to look at questions. I don't think we have time to go through and do screen visuals in the platform. I was prepared to do that, but let's go ahead and look at questions, and if some of them lead us that way, then we certainly are. I'm open to that as well.
There we go. Sorry about that, guys. All right. Feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A tab. And I also can promote anybody to presenter if they'd like to verbally ask their question or, kind of pose a situation for Alex to answer. You can drop that in the chat if you're interested.
Denise, I'm done fiddling, so thanks.
Does anybody want to maybe drop in the chat what marketing model they tend to lean towards in their attribution efforts? Denise said Alex answered all of my questions.
Kelly, the biggest difference is just depth, where revenue analytics are really about the analytics within the revenue, like the deals module, if you think about it in terms of that, versus across the board. So it's really the depth of the two. You're just not getting the full attribution view. You're not getting access to the different models that we talked about either.
Callan said they use the last touch model most frequently. Linear. Melissa.
Callan, can you give some context for the type of business that you're in that you use in last touch? Okay, that's great. So Tom's question, do you think these models are for ABM or general marketing and sales efforts? I'd say across the board. Definitely not domain to just account-based marketing. Matter of fact, I think, from our perspective, and we do a lot of ABM work, HubSpot is certainly blazing that trail. As it pertains to attribution modeling, there's still a little ways to go on the account-based side. So this is definitely more contact-centric. You may know that, of course, you can have a one-to-many association between deals and contacts. So you sort of can get a little bit of that account feel. But this is definitely not domain just to ABM. So I'd say general sales and marketing needs to apply.
We do have a little bit of time and still a good bit of attendees on. Alex, did you want to hop into the platform itself and potentially run through a model?
Yeah, happy to. We can definitely show a couple of screens there. Here we go. All right. So I had a couple already pulled up here. And you guys see my screen okay, Emily?
Yep.
All right. So basically, if you want to create attribution models, it sounds like there's a few folks out there that are already pretty deep into it. Unfortunately, I'm showing you somewhat of a not so great data set just because of privacy things, but we do have access to Biglytics, which is a HubSpot portal that all partners have access to. And what you can see here is first you go in and you create a custom report. So come here to reports in the master top nav, go to reports, and then you want to create a custom report. And here you get all these great, report options. And down here you have attribution. And as I mentioned earlier in the talk, you've got the 3 different types of attribution. You've got revenue, contact create, and you've got deal create. So all 3 are there. Of course, go into revenue, which is what we were talking about today. And then you're going to get this type of view here. I should probably back up one. I'm sorry, I apologize. As I mentioned earlier, settings is the first place to go. So if you go into your settings tab and go here to analytics, you'll see this attribution option. And this is where you have deal create, again in beta, and revenue attribution. And this is where you can turn on and off the various elements that are included in the interaction types. Because this is a demo account and we're not administrators, we can't do that here, but you would be able to do that as long as you're an admin in your account. So you can see the various page views, website pages, landing pages, knowledge-based articles are all here. So you can essentially go through and customize these interactions, which are all going to attribute to attribution along the way. So we recommend doing that first. Once you have established that, then jump back in, go to reports, create, and then you come here. And I'll just show you a couple quick things. HubSpot gives you some quick, already pre-configured ones to explore. So you can just click in and view those. And you can see here that it by default had picked linear and full path in terms of a couple different models. But you can go into configure. And of course, you can configure how things are visualized. You can configure dates. So we can go last 30 days, 90, as far back as you want, including custom dates. You can choose to include very specific deals. So you don't have to necessarily look at the whole ecosystem. You can think about it in terms of deals or just pipelines. Because if you're running multiple pipelines, you want to look at that data a little differently. Owners, so thinking about your different sales team members and the owners of the records, you can filter by that. Deal type, campaigns. So of course, as we think about the different types of campaigns, account-based campaigns, paid campaigns, or maybe they're more industry specific or vertical, you can come in and you can look at things on a campaign basis. And then content types, hey, I want to look at things by the various content types that we showed on that filter field or customization screen. You can come here and do that. And then you've got the different models. You can show different models on the same screen. So, if you're like, hey, I want to see the difference between a U shape and a W shape against full path and linear, it'll show you them. I think this is a really good screen though, so you can see how much variance you could have between attribution, for example, full path here versus linear, pretty big differences in terms of how those things are illustrated. And then finally, you've got dimensions, and you can create up to 2 dimensions here. So campaign or interaction source was, one of the first that was created or that was selected. And then you can come in and do another one, maybe called content type. And here you can see the content types here, or interaction type and then the content type, right? So you can basically drill into these and you can see how that is actually allocated. So sky's the limit, tough to really think about your exact use case here. But I think the biggest point is that it's really accessible. Again, if you're running marketing, enterprise, you're using deals, you're assigning contacts to those deals, your ability to come here and play with this reporting interface is such that you should be able to navigate this pretty easily and drill into this model and find something, hopefully, that adds value to the overall narrative that you are, facilitating or managing within your respective organizations, or for those agency partners out there for, your clients. All right, I'll come back off. Hopefully that was helpful.
No, Thanks for fun. I did just drop a quick comment if anyone's interested.
Okay. Tom said, love to see how to associate contacts with deals. All right. I'll give you that in 30 seconds. Pretty easy. So if I jump back in here to that screen, if I come out of reporting and if you go to deals, and you can create deals, of course, lots of different ways, but I'm just going to go into one that somebody else has created here. And this is your deal record. Over here, you can see contacts are added, but if you want to add another one, you can just come here, search the contact, and then add it. So it's there, but if there was one, you can do it, or you can associate a new contact. So you just would create a new one. So that's where you would do that at. Of course, you can also do this from the actual contact record as well. So if you have a contact, this particular fake contact, you can see here, of course, deals, and you can just add the deal there. So you can create a new deal, or you can associate that person with an existing deal. I think there was one called CPQ. There you go. And that way you can associate them. So lots of different ways. So from the contact record or from the deal record, you can easily make that association. Yes, Tom says can't add contacts in bulk or through a workflow. Yeah, you can. You can essentially create a workflow, and when they meet a certain condition, essentially create a deal. You can do it that way as well.